So, Judge Jackson, all of us will agree that no one should be discriminated against because of race. When you just testified a minute ago that you didn't know if critical race theory was taught in K through 12, I will confess I find that statement a little hard to reconcile with the public record, because if you look at the Georgetown Day School's curriculum, it is filled and overflowing with critical race theory. That among the books that are either assigned or recommended, they include Critical Race Theory, an introduction. They include The End of Policing, an advocacy for abolishing police. They include How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram Kendi. They include literally stacks and stacks of books, and I'll tell you two of the ones that were most stunning. They include a book called Antiracist Baby by Ibram Kendi. And there are portions of this book that I find really quite remarkable. One portion of the book says babies are taught to be racist or anti-racist. There is no neutrality. Another portion of the book, they recommend to babies confess when being racist. Now, this is a book that is taught at Georgetown Day School to students in pre-K through second grade, so 4 through 7 years old. Do you agree with this book that is being taught with kids that babies are racist?
Hey everyone, tonight's Senate hearing produced one of the most talked about confrontations in recent confirmation history. What began as a calm, respectful exchange quickly transformed into a sharp ideological showdown. Senator Ted Cruz opened by reminding the room of shared history, shared credentials, and shared admiration for civil rights icons. The tone initially felt measured, almost collegial, setting expectations for a thoughtful discussion. But beneath that calm was a carefully constructed pivot waiting to happen. Cruz soon steered the conversation away from biography and toward belief systems. He anchored his argument in Martin Luther King Jr.'s vision of judging people by character rather than skin color. From there he began connecting dots between speeches, school boards, and academic movements. The focus shifted from law to culture, and from courtrooms to classrooms. The hearing took a dramatic turn when Cruz introduced the 1619 Project into the discussion. He framed it as a controversial reinterpretation of American history with far-reaching consequences. Then came critical race theory, presented as an ideology that reshapes how society understands race and power. The nominee responded cautiously, distancing her judicial work from political theories. That caution didn't slow the momentum. Cruz escalated by turning attention to children's education and private school curricula. He cited books, reading lists, and language he described as alarming for young minds. The phrase anti-racist baby instantly became the lightning rod. At that moment, the hearing stopped being procedural and became cultural. Supporters leaned in, critics bristled, and social media took notice. What followed was not just a debate over qualifications, but over values. And by the time the exchange moved into sentencing and criminal justice, the lines had already been drawn. This was no longer just a confirmation hearing. It was a proxy battle over the future direction of American institutions.
Okay. As you may recall, during the confirmation hearings of Justice Amy Coney Barrett, there was a great deal of attention paid to the fact that Justice Barrett served as a board member on the Board of Trustees of a religious private school, and the press focused very intensely on the views of that school. In your questionnaire to this committee, you disclosed that you are similarly on a board, specifically the Board of Trustees for the Georgetown Day School, and that you've been a board member since 2019 and you're currently still a board member. Is that correct?
That is correct.
In regard to the Georgetown Day School, you've publicly said, quote, "Since becoming a member of the GDS community 7 years ago, Patrick and I have witnessed the transformative power of a rigorous progressive education that is dedicated to fostering critical thinking, interdependence, and social justice." When you refer to social justice and the school's mission on social justice, what did you mean by that?
Thank you, Senator, for allowing me to address this issue. Georgetown Day School has a special history that I think is important to understand when you consider my service on that board. The school was founded in 1945 in Washington, D.C. at a time in which, by law, there was racial segregation in this community. Black students were not allowed in the public schools to go to school with white students. Georgetown Day School is a private school that was created when 3 white families, Jewish families, got together with 3 black families and said that despite the fact that the law requires us to separate, despite the fact that the law is set up to make sure that black children are not treated the same as everyone else, we are going to form a private school so that our children can go to school together. The idea of equality, justice, is at the core of the Georgetown Day School mission, and it's a private school such that every parent who joins the community does so willingly with an understanding that they are joining a community that is designed to make sure that every child is valued, every child is treated as having inherent worth, and none are discriminated against because of race.
So, Judge Jackson, all of us will agree that no one should be discriminated against because of race. When you just testified a minute ago that you didn't know if critical race theory was taught in K through 12, I will confess I find that statement a little hard to reconcile with the public record, because if you look at the Georgetown Day School's curriculum, it is filled and overflowing with critical race theory. That among the books that are either assigned or recommended, they include Critical Race Theory, an introduction. They include The End of Policing, an advocacy for abolishing police. They include How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram Kendi. They include literally stacks and stacks of books, and I'll tell you 2 of the ones that were most stunning. They include a book called Anti-Racist Baby by Ibram Kendi. And there are portions of this book that I find really quite remarkable. One portion of the book says babies are taught to be racist or anti-racist. There is no neutrality. Another portion of the book, they recommend to babies confess when being racist. Now, this is a book that is taught at Georgetown Day School to students in pre-K through 2nd grade, so 4 through 7 years old. Do you agree with this book that is being taught with kids that babies are racist?
Senator, I do not believe that any child should be made to feel as though they are racist, or though they are not valued, or though they are less than, that they are victims, that they are oppressors. I don't believe in any of that. But what I will say is that when you asked me whether or not this was taught in schools, critical race theory, my understanding is that critical race theory as an academic theory is taught in law schools, and to the extent that you were asking the question, I understood you to be addressing public schools. Georgetown Day School, just like the religious school that Justice Barrett was on the board of, is a private school.
Okay, so you agree critical race theory is taught at Georgetown Day School?
I don't know, because the board is not, the board does not control the curriculum. The board does not focus on that. That's not what we do as board members, so I'm actually not sure.
Well, and I'll note that the board is chaired by Professor Fairfax, your college roommate who introduced you yesterday, so the 2 of you serve on the board together. Another book that is on the summer reading for 3rd through 5th grade is a book called Stamped for Kids, again by Ibram Kendi. I read the entirety of the book, and I will say it is an astonishing book. On page 33, it asks the question, can we send white people back to Europe? That's on 33. That's what's being given to 8 and 9 years old. It also, on page 115, says the idea that we should pretend not to see racism is connected to the idea that we should pretend not to see color. It's called color blindness. Skipping ahead, here's what's wrong with this. It's ridiculous. Skin color is something we all absolutely see. Skipping ahead, so to pretend not to see color is pretty convenient if you don't actually want to stamp out racism in the first place. Now, what this book argues for is the exact opposite of what Dr. King spoke about on the floor of the Lincoln Memorial. And are you comfortable with these ideas being taught to children as young as 4 in respect to the first book, as young as 8 and 9 in respect to the second book?
By the end of the hearing, Ted Cruz made his objective unmistakably clear. He framed his questions around accountability, not personal attacks. At every turn, he returned to first principles rather than political slogans. Cruz grounded his argument in history, law, and the long-term consequences of ideas taught to children. He consistently emphasized that words, books, and philosophies do not exist in a vacuum. His questioning highlighted a growing concern among parents who want transparency in education. Cruz did not argue that children should be shamed or labeled, but that they should be protected from ideological experimentation. He drew a direct contrast between Martin Luther King Jr.'s vision and modern academic frameworks that emphasize race as a defining lens. That contrast resonated because it appealed to unity rather than division. On sentencing, Cruz did what lawmakers are supposed to do: scrutinize records and ask hard questions. He did not dismiss compassion, but he insisted that compassion must coexist with public safety. By laying out specific cases and numbers, he forced clarity where ambiguity had been hiding. His approach underscored that judicial discretion must still align with societal responsibility. Cruz also demonstrated consistency by connecting education, judicial philosophy, and real-world outcomes. He made the case that ideology, once normalized in one institution, rarely stays contained. His questions reflected the concerns of millions who believe institutions should remain neutral rather than activist. Whether one agrees with every point or not, Cruz showed preparation, discipline, and purpose. He did not retreat when answers were vague or deflected. He pressed forward respectfully but firmly. In doing so, he gave voice to parents, victims, and citizens who feel unheard. Ultimately, Ted Cruz positioned himself as a defender of clarity over confusion, character over classification, and law over ideology. That is why this exchange continues to resonate well beyond the hearing room.